Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads. Apologies, I have a cold which will affect my delivery. Not the way I pronounce words, but the way you hear me pronounce them. And that I may have brought that back from a short 3-day trip I had to Amsterdam last week, and in a futile effort to make up for my blocked sinuses, I've tacked on at the end about 2-3 minutes of footage I shot in Amsterdam, mainly of an open-air book market. Anyway, two of the books I've read: Dara, Permanent Earthquake; Lobo, Antunes, The Inquisitor's Manual. This was translated by Richard Zenith, which is a great name. One Woman Show by Coulson. Same Bed, Different Dreams by American-Korean author Ed Park. Letters from a Seducer by Brazilian author Hilda. And this is translated by, as usual, doesn't have it on the front cover, which is very annoying, John Keane. I wonder if that's the John Keane who wrote Counter Narratives. Some non-fiction, or maybe it's fiction, who knows. Essays: These Possible Lives by Fleur, Jaeggy. And finally, The Discovery of Heaven by Dutch author Harry Mulisch, which I read in Amsterdam. Okay, so I'm going to start with Dara, who is a bit of a cult writer in the same way as Alexander Theroux. He publishes his own work through his publishing company called Aurora Books. I had to wait a long time to get hold of this second-hand. And all of his works, I would say, have a tinge of environmentalism or sort of urban decay. This is slightly different. This is a full-on dystopian novel. Now, normally, I'm not terribly interested in dystopian novels. I find them terribly unliterary. I find that a lot of the detail that you would need for the opening of the book as to the nature of what caused dystopia, the process by which society lapses into dystopia, is not there, and the author spends most of the book sort of back telling the story. You'll plunge straight into this. The nature of the dystopia is an island, and it has permanent earthquakes and earth tremors and sort of seismic manipulations of the earth, which has totally uprooted society. I mean, literally. So you have the sort of poetics of ruin, of buildings and structures that fall into disrepute. It doesn't have road signs because the roads are not usable. It has signs with sort of pictorial advice as the best way to fall in order to not hurt yourself. Because the extraordinary thing about this book is right throughout, something we take for granted, or at least able-bodied people take for granted, is to be able to stand up and to walk without, too much difficulty. Every movement here is a struggle. You can be upended at any moment. You can fall, you can hurt yourself. You can fall against, rock, or against, other bits of metal, barbed wire, whatever. You have no control. All you can do is minimise. And in a way, the character that we follow here, he's sort of quite an old hand at this, and has managed to minimise the pain that he feels each time that he falls against something hard, and drives himself on and wills himself not to give in to the pain. So it's a really interesting study of pain, and as I say, of this sort of natural, automatic tendency of balance, of coping under gravity, because right throughout the book he finds innumerable ways of describing different types of pain, different types of movement to the ground, different types of motion, and adapting to the motion of the character. That's what makes this highly literary to me. It's not flashy in its language, but it is very, it doesn't sort of churn out the same way of saying someone's fallen, or someone's got up, or someone's hurt. It finds new and interesting metaphorical and idiomatic ways of saying these things. It's terrific. It's really, really an enjoyable ride. And the difference between this. It's very, although there is sort of remnants of society, so he's not isolated. But I would compare it to The Martian, because there you have a person trying to overcome their environment and all the challenges they face. They have to come up with technological solutions each time, adapting whatever he finds in a sort of limited moonscape. Here, there's no technology that can help him. It is simply his own body that he is bracing against the elements. And that's why I think it's a far more interesting and involving book. Some post-editing Mark thoughts here, things I wanted to say that I forgot. So, other things that we take for granted. You know, how can you sleep peacefully if the ground is always rolling? You know, sometimes you're eating and a big tremor comes and you throw up because your balance is destroyed by the earth, you know, roiling around you. It's just so difficult to survive. You know, you need to find places to sleep. There are no buildings or useful buildings with nice feathery mattresses. You have to find places where, if in your sleep you're going to roll away by an earth movement, you're going to end up sort of being slammed into a set of rocks or fall into a river. You have to give thoughts to all these things that I say that we take for granted, that are very simple. Also, again, if the earth beneath you is unstable and you could lose your footing, you know, overbalance or whatever, you're quite likely to bite your tongue, and there's danger of biting your tongue off. So everyone there has to have mouth guards to stop that happening. But in having mouth guards, it reduces your ability to communicate through speech. So the language, you know, when people do speak to one another in this, apart from the juggler, because he doesn't need a mouth guard, because he's not in danger of biting his own tongue off. So the language of speech here is very single syllable, monosyllabic, you know, economy of speech, because the mouth guard makes it so difficult to get to enunciate complex multi-syllable words. And in terms of what it's about, he's moving across this island because he's looking for the still spot where he's told of this place, although he doesn't know where it is, where there is no movement of the ground, and it becomes like a sort of a holy grail or a search of heaven or whatever. So he's moving across this island in search of this. But we see that although society is or civilization I should say, is in tatters, there is still a class-based system, because people with money and power rebuild unshakable foundations for their houses, and they get other people to haul big stones, which they erect almost like dry walls. There's no cement and mortar. It's just the sort of skillful stacking of these stones, but they're paying other people to haul these heavy stones to give them the security and the relative luxury. They're called manses, as in mansions. So there's a really interesting class system here, and one of their mansion guys actually gets around by being carried by a divan, because there's no factories, there's no employment. You have to make money where you can in order to buy the limited foodstuffs that are available on the island. One is by stone hauling, and then he discovers later on another is by, you know, being not a pallbearer but a divan bearer. The other interesting encounter he has is he's sort of beguiled by this juggler, who seems, you know, juggling is your sort of working with gravity, but to give the illusion you're defying gravity. Only this juggler is seemingly unmoved by the swells and rolls of the ground underneath him. He seems to have perfect balance. Now, he himself is not one of the class privileged. He's just a guy who seems to be able to have adapted by not only sort of figuring out how to juggle against gravity, but his own body places against gravity. And I won't spoil the surprise of how he does that, but it's a really interesting, it really makes you think about, again, the things we take for granted. Motion, stillness and gravity, and working against these things. Absolutely fabulous ride, 5 stars. And on to Antonio Lobos Antunes, the Inquisitor's Manual. So this is about Portugal under the dictators and the revolution that toppled them, and There's the sort of the transition, and it's centred around a minister in the dictator Salazar's cabinet, and he lives on this sort of huge farm. He has servants, and it's so sort of not remote, but Salazar and his cabinet like meeting there from time to time because they feel safe, secure, they're not going to be spied on, and all these sorts of things. Each chapter is divided into a report by an eyewitness, starting with this minister, and then we have a commentary on the report given by another character. So it's the characters involved are the servants, mistresses, sort of illegitimate offspring from these mistresses, the mothers of the mistresses. It's just a whole panoply of characters. His chauffeur, and each is commenting on the evidence that's given by somebody else, and it works really, really well. And it's very engrossing. It's very, it's quite funny. The characters sort of slightly lurch towards satire and caricature, but in an entertaining way. Antunes is a master. He's a puppet master. He doesn't, let go of their tension at any moment for sort of, slapstick or kind of gross humour. And the guy can write. I mean, how about this for a paragraph? The morning light of Setubal in the blinds was the amber colour of a morgue where Christ, with the sunken cheeks of a pusher dead from an overdose, waited on the wall for his autopsy. The curtains resembled mortuary linens, and the brushes and cases were lined up on the marble-top dresser like bones for the coroner's inquest. My wife slumping back down like an octopus going to sleep, plunging her arms into the sheets like tentacles into sand. So it's just a very, very enjoyable reading experience. It is historical, and yet it's also contemporary. And it's a broad oversweep of life under the dictatorship coming to an end, and the sort of the sort of slow movement towards democracy that would ultimately replace it. 5 stars. And on to One Woman Show by Christine Coulson. So this very much is in the school of one of my all-time favourite books, Important Artefacts and Personal Property from the collection of Leonora Doolan and Harold Morris, including books, street fashion and jewellery. And I will post a link to my review of this. But this book is basically a pseudo-auction catalogue of this couple, Leonora Doolan and Harold Morris, where all their worldly goods are being sold off at auctions. This is like an auction catalogue, and because they're divorcing or splitting up. And what's so clever about this book is you get an insight into the nature of these two characters and the interrelationship between them simply through the objects that they've accumulated in their married or shared life. It's wonderful. This is sort of in the same vein. So this is about a WASP woman, a semi-aristocrat woman in the US throughout the 20th century, from cradle to grave almost, but presented in single paragraph pages. And these paragraphs are as if they're the explanatory plaques you get in an art gallery or a museum, where it explains what it is. And each one is starts off rigidly with whose collection this artifact, this artwork has come from, in the sense of who owns her at that point. So when she's a child, it's from the collection of her parents. When she marries her first husband, it's from the collection of her husband's parents, and so on and so forth. And it's a brilliant overview of a life, very cleverly done, quite snarky in places, quite funny, because when she gets married for the first time, we also get pictures or vitrines, whatever you want to call them, about each of her 4 bridesmaids, and they age with her through the book, and that's where a lot of the sort of acerbic humour comes from, because one of her bridesmaids first went out with a guy that she ends up marrying, and has sort of quite unreconciled jealousy that this woman has ended up marrying him and not her, which is completely misplaced and empty and useless jealousy, because the guy's killed in World War So none of them can have him. But it's a stream throughout the book. It's just really clever, really well done. She marries 3 times in all, and you get, like in this, you get a real sense of the person, and it's a critique of sort of social class and sort of the WASP culture. And just to give you an example, I shall read one of the vitrines. So this is Daughter, aged 70 in 1976. And it's from the collection of, the Etz collection of her parents, and also of her first set of in-laws, and of her second husband, and of her third husband. So it's passed through all of those as she passes through them in terms of ownership. A deathbed revelation upturns accepted scholarship about Kitty's provenance. Her mother admits that an alternate manufacturer collaborated on her production, rendering Kitty not the daughter of Whit Whittaker, but the output of Digby Toppinghill. Visual comparison to the concealed progenitor leaves little room for argument, though a reputation for bland mediocrity sours this long-dead source. Kitty feels her gilding dull in the light of her reattribution, and indignantly drops her mother's hand just before her final breath. That's when she's visiting her mother on her deathbed in hospital. So this was great fun. It's a romp. You get through it very quickly because, as I say, they're very short and they're on every other page. But I really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars. I will say that this, I think, offers a little more, but I will have no hesitation in saying read both. And on to Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park. So this book does for Korea, North and South, what Gina Apostol's book Insurrecto did for the Philippines, and that is it tells in a sly way, sly literary way, the modern history of Korea. It starts without it ever being a sort of a historical novel, because it's all the time bound up not only in the contemporary sort of filter, looking back, refractions looking back on it, but in terms of literariness itself and books and texts and historical texts. It starts off by posing the question, what is history? But very quickly you see, actually, it's really asking, what is nationhood, and what is it to be a citizen of that nation? Because it starts off with sort of Korea under the colonial yoke of Japan, with all that ensued, and in opposition to this, a national provisional government, Korean government, set up in exile, dotted all over the world, Hawaii, China, Europe, lots of places. And the genius of this book is that you're never quite sure who's a member of this revolution, who's a member of this provisional government, because they keep adding more and more unlikely people, as if they were pledging support, because it's a mythology. Whether this provisional government existed or not, it doesn't matter. It's about claiming people outside of Korea to your cause, to help bolster your cause. So, for example, there is an inner core of members who, to sort of show their devotion to the cause, they each cut off the top part of one of their fingers. And because the silent movie actor Harold Lloyd lost a couple of fingers when a prop exploded and took off a couple of fingers, he is suborned into the revolutionary, the provisional government of Korea. Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan acted in a wartime sort of propaganda movie about, the terrible iniquities the Japanese caused in Korea. All sorts of people are, as I say, sort of drafted into this who would have no connection at all. And I think that's the genius of the book. It's about mythology, and it's about the nature of power and politics and influence. So we go from colonial Japan, then Japan loses the Second World War, But instead of gaining unified independence, of course, Korea was split into two, the Communist North and the Capitalist South, and then you had the Korean War. And one of the characters in here was a US pilot who fought in the Korean War. And when the war was finished and he was discharged, he wrote a series of science fiction books, which eventually are going to get made into a movie, which is where the modern parts of this book are. And you get all sorts of again, these sort of associations between Korea, non-Koreans, the power politics of America, Russia, China, all beautifully woven like a tapestry. I mean, there's so many streams and associations here, but you can follow them all. It's not overwhelming, it's not difficult, it's just beautifully rendered. Quite funny in places. I just really enjoyed the ingenuity of this book. Other characters, so Sun Yat-moon, the guy who founded the moon is. Don't forget, he called it the Unification Church because part of what he was after was the unification of North and South Korea. We get the son of Kim Jong, I can never remember, Kim Jong-il was the first, I think, and then his son who took over when he died. He was a big movie buff and actually wrote under a pseudonym in an American sort of cult movie review fanzine or magazine. So we get, that whole sort of American Hollywood influence on this guy who was, from the Far East, communist dictator, and yet, that's sort of undermined slightly by his sort of devotion to Western Hollywood movies and stuff. As I say, it's just a brilliant mosaic, a brilliant tapestry, and you get such a good grounding in sort of recent Korean history without even realising that that's one of the aims of this book, is to educate you, because it's done supremely well. And again, this guy can write. A couple of examples. Most of the Korean movies from the 20s and 30s exist only in written accounts or scripts. During World War II, the Japanese melted down every reel they could find to extract the silver. And Ira Yang, which is the name of the film, is no exception. Is it still called alchemy when art is turned into a precious metal? Brilliant, simple sentence. The signature page is dated March the 7th, 1983. Under your father's name, assorted stamps and initials decorate the bottom, like some 19th century peace treaty. So just wonderful stuff. I really enjoyed this, as of course I did in Surrector, and again I'll post my link to this. I don't like historical fiction, but when it's done in a literary, formalist way like both of these, I love it. 5 stars. I also just wanted to say that in my last video I said that the 2 tropes I dislike most in literature, and in films for that matter, are the courtroom scenes and dinner party scenes. And books like Transit by Rachel Cusk have disastrously bad, I feel, dinner party scenes in them. This book opens with a rendition of a dinner party scene that actually goes against and undermines my own beliefs, because it's a fantastic scene. It's a scene of in a Korean restaurant, and lots of movers and shakers in the American Korean community, sort of one-upping each other, and they're sort of manoeuvring for power. And it's a sort of scene about networking, really. And it sets the tone for the book about the provisional Korean government and their sort of power plays and movements and things. It's really good, so I actually have to swallow my own prejudice on that one. Letters from a Seducer by Hilda Hilst. So this starts off with an epigram by E.M. Tioran, the nihilist writer supreme, and so you know what sort of ground you're going to get into here. A rake, a philanderer, is baiting his virginal sister, trying to get her to lose her cherry, effectively. She has a sort of a male admirer, but she's very chaste and nothing's really happening, and the brother is trying to provoke her, saying, he's up for it, go for it. And he does this by basically, it's an epistolary novel, by basically writing to her of his sexual encounters, which vary in breadth, and it sort of in some places verges on the pornographic, But what's remarkable, all the time, you know, you're reading this, it's a male character talking about his male sexuality and his male sexual escapades. But of course, this has been written by a woman, Hilda Hilst, and that's a remarkable achievement of this book. I think you've got to be of a certain mental tenor to enjoy it. But, you know, it's just so well done. Again, it's quite short, it won't take you long. If you've never read Hilst before, I'd say it's probably not a bad place to start. There are not many of her books are translated into English. This is one of two by NRB. Is it NRB Classics? Oh, no, sorry, Pushkin Press Classics. So two of her books have recently been, of which this is one, have been recently translated into English. I'd read a book of hers a long time ago. That to date, that had been the only one I'd read because nothing else was really available. So she's sort of in the Clarice Lispector vein, not just because they're both Brazilian, but in terms of that sort of intensity. She's not as good as Lispector, or she's not as intriguing, I don't think, as Lispector, at least based on the two books I've read, but she's still worthwhile reading. I gave this 4 stars. And on to Fleur Jaeggy's These Possible Lives. So these are 3 essays on Thomas de Quincey, John Keats, and a writer I've never heard of called Marcel Schwab. Very short. In a way, they're sort of slightly David Marksonian, in that when she's talking about any of the 3 writers, she's also talking about the period in which they wrote, and she's dropping in facts about other writers or other things about the period in which they wrote, in a way like David Markson's Shoebox trilogy. And I really appreciated that. They are beautifully written. You know, they're very seamless and smooth, and again, a very quick read. So I gave it 4 stars. And finally, The Discovery of Heaven by Harry Mulisch. So this started off really well. 2 angels are discussing a strategy that one of them has put in place, and they're talking about the movements of people on Earth. They have to get the exact combination of genetics and environmental circumstances in which the offspring will be brought up. And this angel is talking about how difficult that is to pull off, because there's 8 billion people on Earth, whatever it is. Finding the right 2, getting them to meet, and then having a certain set of life circumstances which will affect the upbringing of the progeny. It's very, very precise. So we get these two Dutch guys meeting. One of them, his surname is Quist. He comes from a political family, to the extent that his father was a Prime Minister of Holland, the Netherlands, sorry. But he's very much the black sheep of the family. He's someone who's fascinated by language and linguistics. He basically has sort of taught himself virtually every single language on Earth. And he has these sort of, a bit like the Rosetta Stone, but it's another one that has never been translated. It's a sort of lifelong puzzle for him, trying to solve it. And then this other guy, whose mother was Jewish and whose father was a Dutch Nazi, and eventually the father reports his wife to the German occupiers, and she's hauled off to a concentration camp. So his father has effectively caused the death of his mother. And then his father is tried as a war criminal and executed. So he's an orphan, but that's his sort of schizoid upbringing. And these two sort of are brought together, maybe by the angel, if you believe that sort of thing, and they become fast and firm friends, lifetime friends, and the banter is pretty good between them. It is slightly sort of snooty and elitist, but it's entertaining. And then they both sort of fall for the same woman, who's a cellist, and the guy whose parents had died initially is going out with her, and then they break up, and she starts going out with Quist and falls pregnant. Only the problem is, it's not clear whose baby. Quist has no idea that the other guy has sort of had a one-night stand with her again, but it's not clear whose baby it is, and this is part of what the angels have sort of brought together. And there's a hilarious section when they're in Cuba attending a conference, and they end up in the wrong part of the conference, where it's with all the radical revolutionaries and militias and sort of communist guerrillas. So it's the first half of this book is really entertaining, and it sort of bounces along quite entertainingly. Unfortunately, the wife, because she ends up marrying Quist, she's called Ada. They get news that her father has died, so they go back. They're travelling in terrible weather conditions in the car to go accompany her mother, and unfortunately they have a car crash, and Ada ends up in a coma. And all of this obviously is with she's got a child inside her who is saved. And these are the conditions that the angels have fashioned in order for this child, this progeny, to be able to go on to do the thing that they need him to do. And the book carries on, and we get, Ada remains in a coma, and these two sort of go their divergent ways. Quist gets into Dutch politics, and our guy, because he thinks the child might be his, he proposes to the grandmother that they bring the child up together, because Quist isn't really the fathering type, now that Ada's not on the scene to share the burden with him. And Quist agrees to this, but the reason that the other guy's doing it is because he thinks it might be his child. Only things get a bit weird with the mother-in-law. Well, she's not mother-in-law, but when she comes into his bedroom in the middle of the night and sleeps with him. And we get to this. He hadn't seen her. He groped for the cord of the switch, dazzled by the light, closed his eyes. What had just happened was impossible. It must have been an hallucination, provoked by all the emotion and exhaustion. He felt his penis, still half erect and soaking wet. Perplexed, he wondered whether he really had slept with the grandmother of his child, in the bed of her daughter, who had just been in an accident, dressed in the pyjamas of her husband who had just died. Those last two facts were certain in any case. So there is some good writing and some sort of ingenious sort of small plot twists in this. But the last third of the book is just risible. So the child has grown to sort of adulthood, and then we go on this sort of sub-Da Vinci Code religious stuff, which had been the angels' machinations all the time. But I'm not interested, in sort of historical religious treasure hunts, conspiracy theories, all of this stuff. I'm not interested. And the book lost itself for me then. I'd really enjoyed it up to that point, but then... So overall, I give it 3 stars. And there you have it. So just to refresh, Evan Dara, Permanent Quake, 5 stars. Antonio Lobo Antunes, The Inquisitor's Manual, 5 stars. One Woman Show, Christine Coulson, 4 stars. 4.5 really. Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park, 5 stars. Letters from a Seducer by Hilda Hilst, 4 stars. These Possible Lives by Fleur, Jaeggy, 4 stars. And finally, The Discovery of Heaven by Harry Mulisch, 3 stars. So, there you have it. So every road in Amsterdam seems to be called Straat or Gracht. Yet this is just called Spoy. Apologies for Dutch viewers for pronunciation. And on Spoy, it's a rather wonderful open air book market on Fridays. All languages. Lots of Dutch versions of non-Dutch books. Lots of art books, it has to be said, because Amsterdam, of course, is a city of art. Auden, Silhouette. Lots of beat stuff, of course. Amsterdam being a city basically, or modern Amsterdam being a city basically founded by hippies. Robert Musil. Oh my god.
Catherine Tempest, presumably not. Kate Tempest, the poets. Leibniz, who I think was Dutch. Newton's great rival. Might be German, actually. Dickens next to Marx, two good Victorians. Some generally oldie worldy books. Some Shakespeare. Collection of Playboy magazines, that's your thing. Thomas Bernhard section. What's Thomas Bernhard? Knockoff. Milano 2666 and the hardback. Finnegan's Wake in Dutch. Good luck with that. Dante, I mean it's hard enough in English.
Ik weet niet, het lijkt wel of ze het expres doen, maar ze vergeten. Ze hebben ook mensen die allemaal aandelen hebben.
So the official Ajax Amsterdam club shop, probably having a fire sale since they managed to blow an 8-point lead to lose the title.